I did kill Kenyatta Bambi. But I want you to tell it like it is if you gonna tell it.
Behind every crime is a punishment, but some courtroom sentences have left the world in utter disbelief. From twisted murders to calculated betrayals, these cases tested the very limits of justice. Get ready to witness the most shocking sentences ever handed down.
Granville Ritchie was sentenced to death for the 2014 murder of that young girl whose body was found off the Courtney Campbell Causeway.
Granville Ritchie.
Physically painful and psychologically torturous death at the hands of the defendant.
In May 2014, Felicia Williams was left all alone in the care of a monster in Granville Ritchie, who molested and strangled the 9-year-old girl to death. The prosecutor stated that the little girl was betrayed by a family friend in Ebony Wiley, who helped with a cover-up, hoping to protect herself from any backlash that might want to come up. She later admitted on the stand on Ritchie's trial that she lied during the investigation. In the year 2019, after about 5 years of the fugitive escaping justice, he was later convicted of child R-word and murder. Then, fast forward to September of the next year, he was sentenced to death by a jury. And just recently, the Florida Supreme Court rejected his request for a do-over for the pretty harsh and crazy sentence that was passed on him. In a desperate measure to make sure he wasn't sentenced to death, he began asking for police records and police documents, as well as from multiple agencies. He was basically trying to spot any error that could actually aid him in escaping certain justice and give Mitchell a second chance on an appeal hearing. The prosecutors referred to this term as a fishing expedition, and also the Tampa judge. Mitchell wanted to make sure it didn't turn into one of those kinds of cases. I'm not interested in just full-scale fishing expeditions, but rather a more targeted request that could potentially lead to a colorful claim. And obviously, I would find the defendant is entitled to it. It was during a virtual hearing on a Thursday when the court got an update that documents had been turned over, and whatever evidence still needed to be given to Ritchie should be given. He immediately ruled it out by stating to the public, "I am going to grant the defendant's request for public records, solely in part as it relates to any records from the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office by their Child Protective Services. If Ritchie could manage to find any mistake in any record that he has in possession, it would give him the power to fight his death sentence and possibly overthrow it even."
For the first-degree murder of Felicia Williams, the defendant Granville Ritchie is hereby sentenced to death. Defendant shall be delivered into the custody of the Florida Department of Corrections at the Florida State Prison.
After trying to overthrow his death sentence, the court wasn't going to hear any of it as Ritchie was called to the stand, and it was proclaimed to him that the court agrees with the jury's death sentence on him, as the evidence presented agrees with a strict sentence like that. Assaulting then killing a minor should warrant a punishment worse than death. Furthermore, it was stated that the criminal would be delivered to the Florida Department of Corrections in the Florida State Prison, where he would be held in probation until a certain date of his execution would be decided by the state governor of the state of Florida. He had 3 counts of charges, and each one of them resulted in a brutal punishment, all in the case of the murder, exploitation, and assault on a minor by an adult.
I do not know what your spiritual leanings are, and it really does not matter to me either way. I am very grateful that I live in a country where people can believe.
The very last thing the judge had to say to Granville Ritchie, she was blatantly stating to him in very simple terms about his spiritual leanings and all that he believed in, and urged him to pray to any higher power that he believed in between that time and when he would be executed, so that his soul would find forgiveness for the heinous crimes he had committed. She closed her statement to him saying, "May God have mercy on your soul."
Redemption for you. And what I mean by that is of your physical being, your person. You will remain incarcerated until the date of your death is scheduled to occur.
That was the end of the case of Granville Ritchie, who assaulted and murdered 9-year-old Felicia, leaving her family in pain and agony. His execution was later decided to be carried out by electrocution by the laws of the state and the governance.
All right.
Listen, stop.
All right.
Listen to me.
I'm not
going to raise your voice again.
I'm not going to raise my voice again.
Ronnie O'Neal.
Because I want you to know the actual facts.
In the year 2018, the pair of a mother and her daughter were brutally murdered, or better still, betrayed by the one they never thought would betray them. Humans are cruel, but this level of cruelty is worse than any could imagine. Looking at the proposed role of the murderer in their home at Riverview. While the reasons for the murder were pretty unclear, it was a really heartbreaking and emotional story. His daughter, Ron Nevaeh, had probably the saddest exit a child with special needs could ever experience. He came into the house and attacked his own family, shooting his girlfriend and killing her on the spot. While the most aggravating of them all was his daughter, who had special needs and could not talk. She just stood there and watched as she couldn't run or talk, while her dad, Ronnie, struck her with a hatchet and killed her on the spot before setting the house on fire. His 8-year-old son, who testified against him, said that when Ronnie struck Ron Nevaeh with the hatchet, he saw a tear fall from her eyes. It was literally the most brutal way for a child to go, as she was betrayed by the one who was supposed to be her protector all through her life.
For something I didn't do, and I am not sorry for the things I did do.
As if the devil himself came up to earth to inhabit a body on earth and perpetrate all sorts of undoings. While being presented at court, Ronnie showed a rather nonchalant attitude toward the court and all its attendees, raising his voice and infuriating the affected with every chance he got. He started off by saying to the court that he's not sorry for what he didn't do, and damn straight, he's not sorry for what he did do. That was a statement that was clearly saying, I don't give two Fs, do your worst. The judge cautioned his lousy behavior and threatened to eject him from the court before he composed himself, not until he got another chance to say something silly again. This time he stabbed the rubber balloon with a flaming sword, facing the mother of the deceased, and said to her with a silly grin on his face, sorry for your loss. And that was enough to make everyone know if he saw his girlfriend and his kid again, he would kill them again without even blinking, and even in a more brutal way.
When the person from fire department, when he testified, and when he said that he retrieved the body of Ronnie O'Neal from the home.
Judge Sisko could not hide her regrets and her disappointment in the act that just happened, and the fact that the father showed not even a single blink of remorse at all. I mean, he just killed his little girl who had special needs. How could he go through with it? She furthermore stated that this case was the worst she had ever experienced in all her 19 years of being a judge.
She already had a life where she was born with challenges regarding her physical and her mental disabilities. But the pain and suffering that she suffered that night at your hands.
While killing the mother of both little Ronnie and Ron Nevaeh right before their eyes. The horror of that alone was enough to scar a child for life, especially Ron Nevaeh, who was born with challenges already. To make matters worse, he struck the little girl with a hatchet, and all she could do was shed a tear. Judge Sisko spoke with such pain and anger that you could even see she was almost crying while speaking. All that Ronnie did was just at the end of every sentence the judge made. The last thing that little Ron Nevaeh felt before she left this earth was the cruelty of her father's betrayal.
Mr. O'Neal, I will adjudicate you guilty, sentence you to life in prison with a minimum mandatory of life in prison without the possibility of parole.
While delivering 6 counts of punishments to the prosecuted, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. This sentence was repeated 3 times, making it 3 life sentences. He was also given 30 years imprisonment for assaulting a child on 2 different occasions, making it a total of 60 years imprisonment. Then, finally, for resisting arrest without violence, this was nothing compared to the other charges and counts he faced, so it was really not necessary. And then the judge ended the hearing.
I'm not pleased with what the verdict was, and I wish you could overturn it and give him what he's rightfully due.
Carrie Lloyd, who was literally in tears for the majority of her testimony over the death of her lovely daughter Kenyatta Barron and her granddaughter Ron Nevaeh, stated to the court that she was disappointed by the jury's decision to draft life sentences for the killer instead of giving him a brutal life sentence, as he even deserved a punishment worse than death, if there's anything possibly worse than death.
Your life is ruined, but you also ruined a lot of lives and ended 3 lives.
Amber Perera. Young people don't take the caution that states, don't drink and drive. And in this case, it has cost Amber her entire life, as she did not only drink and drive, but furthermore killed an entire family on the spot.
Police said Perera continued driving and was arrested minutes later after her car could go no further because of damage.
The Felipek family, consisting of Louise Felipek, Rita Felipek, and their 8-year-old daughter, Georgia Felipek, all died on the Selman Expressway as a result of Amber's drunk driving.
Amber Perera was driving eastbound when she lost control of her car, hitting the back of a Hyundai. Louis and Rita Felipek and their daughter Georgia were all killed when their car was sent into the westbound lanes.
Knowing she was in for it and was pretty much screwed at this point, Amber put up a defense that she was experiencing a seizure when the accident happened and could not control herself when the accident occurred. But her prosecutors accused her of being drunk while driving, which was exactly what had happened. When she saw she was losing it, she then pleaded guilty to the court and requested a 20-year imprisonment sentence. But the judge was pretty strict and surprised the entire court with his sentence.
Is ruined, but you also ruined a lot of lives and ended 3 lives.
Christopher Sabella made sure he held his every word and was not lenient in passing out judgment to Amber based on what she had done. At a point, it wasn't even about the drunk driving or the lives lost, but the pain she had caused the families of those affected. Christopher Sabella made a reference to a statement she made while she was still in a jailhouse, when she said her life was ruined. He then reminded her and said, "You're correct. Your life is ruined, but you also ruined a lot of lives, and then ended 3 lives also." The prosecutors demanded that she be thrown in jail for life, while the defense pleaded for a 20-year sentence. But Christopher Sabella had other ideas, and then found a balance between the life imprisonment plea and the 20-year plea. As a result of that, he gave Amber a sentence of 50 years, which is more or less the same thing as a life sentence. Amber was shattered, but it was a result of her actions and carelessness. But she wasn't the only one shattered as a result of it all. In general, there were several individuals affected by the accident, but it affected no one like Tracy Kelly, who would have wished that she died in the crash. Tracy Kelly was another person involved in the deadly crash, but she survived and didn't lose her life. But even with that, her life as she knew it had come to an end, as she continues to be in intense pain and suffering. She was in the 3rd vehicle affected, but didn't lose her life like the Felipeks did. But even with that, she lives every day as if she's dying. The sentence given by the judge gave her a bit of closure, as she stated.
And that she will spend her days in pain. Just her not being happy every day brings joy to me.
Tracy said to the news that knowing she was going to spend the rest of her life in pain and that she was not going to be happy anymore brought joy to her well-being. The father of Rita and the grandfather of their little girl who died in the crash was also so emotional when he came up to the stand. He felt so terrible and could not help but shed tears while testifying. He told Amber that she could never repay him for what she had cost him, and he could not pay her back for what she had done. It was all emotions with the father of the deceased, as he said he could never forgive her before leaving the stand drenched in tears.
Mr. Lorenzo first. Mr. Lorenzo, you've represented yourself pro se in these proceedings.
Stephen Lorenzo. In this somewhat weird and abysmal case, Stephen Lorenzo was being tried for a crime he committed well over 20 years ago against 2 men in 2003, where he allegedly murdered 2 men, Jason Galehouse and Michael Wachholtz. On back-to-back days, both men went missing from the Tampa club and were not found alive anymore. What's crazier, the prosecutor pleaded guilty and requested that he be sentenced to death.
Patience and fairness to me while I stumbled my way through this whole process.
Before the sentencing took place, the state attorneys had some family members from Jason Galehouse's family who wanted to speak, but they decided not to anymore. Just then, Lorenzo raised his hand to say something to the court. He went on to thank everyone, including the prosecutors, by telling them that they did their job and did it well, stating that in this lifetime, he was the bad guy and they were the good guys. In the next lifetime, when there's a rebirth, it might be the other way around. At this point, he was beginning to sound like a psychopath, but the court gave him the floor to talk.
This is the sentencing.
When the mothers of both the victims of Lorenzo came on to speak earlier that month, Mrs. Ruth Wachholtz, the mother of Michael Wachholtz, and then Mrs. Pam Williams, the mother of Jason Galehouse, there was one thing that the pair kept hammering on, and that was the fact that they had been waiting for justice for quite some time now. A wholesome 2 decades they had long waited for, but now they wait no more. Mrs. Pam Williams faced Lorenzo and told him from one Italian to another, to condono a morte, which translates to, I sentence you, Mr. Lorenzo, to death, as they felt that was the only penalty that was best for a man capable of portraying such heinous crimes. What were the crimes, you'd ask? He kidnapped Jason Galehouse and Michael Wachholtz. As if kidnapping them wasn't enough, he assaulted them both mercilessly before proceeding to R-word both men. He didn't stop there, as he proceeded to murder and mutilate both men. Dude was really crazy. But then, after 20 whole years, justice caught up with him.
Judge, I will inform the court that Mr. Lorenzo has already prepared a notice of appeal, and I intend on filing it when we leave the courtroom.
I appreciate that.
Very good.
This was the most shocking part of the entire hearing. Even as many expected the sentence to be a death sentence, it was a real bummer that the prosecutor was actually asking for the death sentence, which took everyone aback, even the judge. But Judge Sabella remained unfazed and continued to listen to all the accused had to say as he stated his reasons for asking to be killed instead of being in jail. While still perching on the concept of reincarnation, he told the judge that he wanted the death sentence so he could leave this world and find another body to come back to this world with, while stating that's how it works, and that's how everything is. We are spiritual beings, and we have to leave this body eventually and come back with another, telling the judge that he's just trying to speed up the process. 20 years passed, and there possibly isn't any form of remorse to be shown over the remains of dead people who have rotted long ago, as he just spoke so freely to the judge.
And I don't know if what you say is perhaps some form of reverse psychology.
Albert Perkins, who was also a victim of Lorenzo but lived to tell the tale as he managed to escape when Lorenzo fell asleep, said to the hearing that he was drugged and kidnapped by Lorenzo. By the time he could open his eyes, he was already bound and was being tortured by Lorenzo. He stated that Lorenzo was always abducting gay men to use as sex slaves. Well, after his statement and pleading for a death sentence, Judge Sabella let him know he wasn't having any of it, and his testament was going to do him no good if he was trying to play some kind of reverse psychology on him or something. He was going to judge accordingly, and that was giving the most accurate sentence. He sentenced Lorenzo to death ultimately and ended the court session with a parting word, "May God have mercy on your soul," to which the prosecuted replied, "My soul's fine."
Bombshell announcement in the murder of Bonita Springs doctor Teresa Sievers. Her husband, Mark Sievers, has been arrested for his alleged role in her death.
Mark Sievers, dated the 28th of June, 2015, while Teresa Sievers was enjoying a peaceful day in her home located in Bonita Springs, Florida. 2 men broke into the house and murdered her in the most brutal way possible by using a hammer to bludgeon her 17 times until she died. 6 months later, police arrested the 2 men who carried out the murder, Curtis Wayne Wright Jr. and Jimmy J. Rogers, both from Missouri. Wondering what Mark Sievers had to do with the crime, right? I'll let you in on it. He was the one who masterminded everything that happened, and yes, contracted the killers who murdered his wife in their home. She was actually returning home from a family vacation as she was returning alone to a house that she thought was empty. Unknown to her, 2 men were waiting to murder her. As she pulled up in the driveway, she brought her luggage out of the vehicle and began making her way inside the house. When she got to the kitchen, that was when the 2 men attacked her, plunging a hammer into her head until she died. It was stated that her husband, Mark, had been planning it for a while, some weeks to be precise. When he traveled to Missouri for Curtis's wedding, Curtis then recruited Jay Rogers, promising him some part of the money from what Mark was going to give him. He probably didn't believe in his marriage and trust his wife completely. The whole motive was life insurance money and the fear that Teresa would take their children away. This would have shown that the couple was having issues between one another, but whatever it is, it still does not warrant taking someone's life, let alone your wife, whom you wedded in holy matrimony. Leaving your kids without a mother was the most stupid thing he could do, but that was just the least of everything. as he got a more terrible sentence than he was hoping for. Plus, he promised to give Curtis $100,000 from the life insurance money, and it was from that money that Curtis hired Rogers to be his buddy, promising him spoils from after the dreaded event. Mark Sievers, Curtis Wainwright, and Jimmy J. Rogers were all convicted of murder, be it first degree or second degree. Rogers' girlfriend was the Oliver Twist to the entire case, as she spilled the beans to the police about her boyfriend admitting to killing the medical personnel, and all investigations and interrogations led to discovering the truth and apprehending the culprits. You'd think that since Mark didn't actively participate in the murder of his wife, he would not get a harsh sentence. But then think again. He had the worst punishments of the 3 men. The 12 jurors would have to come to an agreed decision to sentence Mark to death if that's what they wanted. And yes, they wanted a death sentence instead of a life sentence. Even as it was looking likely that he would get a life sentence, it took the jury 4 hours to decide, and Judge Kyle sentenced Mark Sievers to death. There was an obvious relief on the face of the siblings and family of Teresa as they could finally put the case behind them and try to move on with their lives. When justice is not served, it troubles and disturbs the minds of the affected, and it's been 4 years since her death. And finally, justice was served to the pleasing of everyone except the man who got the death sentence, though. Furthermore, Teresa's mother got custody of both kids, who are now orphans due to the greediness and ruthlessness of their father, who could have taken a better approach to his marital issues than taking the life of his wife. While both Mark Sievers' daughters stated that they do not want their dad to be killed, the judge stated that he would put that into consideration. But in the end, he decided to go ahead with the jury's decision to sentence Mark to death, turning 2 little girls into orphans before they even hit puberty. Cases out there are sure to give you the creeps and the fright of life, but that's life, and life just has to happen. Some humans are pretty much not human.
I would submit that this case is probably the most difficult and shocking case that this county in St. Johns County has.
Aiden Fucci, only 14 years old at the time, brutally murdered his 13-year-old classmate from Patriots Oak Academy. He reportedly stabbed her a staggering 114 times before abandoning her body in the woods where it was later found. Following his arrest, Fucci was seen recording videos from the backseat of a police car and posting them on Snapchat.
We're having fun in a f***ing cop car.
Yep. Tristan.
What's up, guys? Yep. Tristan, if you f***ing walk out the damn...
When you see this in a month...
Later on, a video surfaced online, on Snapchat to be precise, where his parents were talking with him in an interrogation room, telling him that what he did was not even smart and was totally dumb. But they failed to use the right word, which was that he was a wicked and heartless person, stabbing a fellow human being 114 times. He pretty much just sat there, listening to them as he knew what he was into already. They also informed him that he was all over the news, which I'm sure he probably knew about already, as the evidence exposed him completely.
It's all over, you're all over the internet everywhere. Social media.
It is on social media. It'll probably come stay with me after we get done with this. Just for your well, safe being.
This is serious.
It was well about hours after the parents of the deceased discovered that their daughter was missing at this point, and then decided to file a complaint. Since she was still a minor, it wasn't hard to declare her missing, and the search for the little girl began. Little did they know that she was dead already. The body of the 13-year-old was found on Mother's Day, the 9th of May, 2021, and her body was found in the worst state, as she had been stabbed and slashed by her killer, severally, in a pretty brutal and inhumane manner. You'd come to wonder what a 13-year-old would have done to deserve this kind of savage treatment.
How far did you go in school?
To 8th grade.
Are you able to read, write, speak, and understand the English language?
Yes, Your Honor.
Are you under the influence of any medication, drugs?
Prosecutors presented a chilling video that allegedly showed Aiden Fucci walking with a girl shortly before her murder. In the same footage, Fucci was seen running away from the area where her body was later discovered, roughly 90 minutes after they had entered the location together. The victim's body was found with 114 stab wounds, including 49 defensive wounds, 35 to the head, 35 to the neck, 29 to the back, and shoulders, and 6 fatal injuries. A truly horrifying scene. With all this overwhelming evidence, there was no hiding place for Fucci, as he had been caught red-handed already. In the state of all that, he had no other choice but to plead guilty because, yes, he was guilty, while pleading guilty to first-degree murder and awaiting the decision of the judge. It was pretty obvious and evident that this was going to be a strict sentence, but something to consider was the fact that he was a minor. Normally, an adult would immediately get a death sentence due to the gravity and heartlessness of the case, but his age earned him a bit of leverage as he was given a life sentence by the judge and also was given the chance to be able to review his sentence in the next 25 years, which is more like a guaranteed 25 years imprisonment and then a review that may see his life sentence terminated and he be set free instead.
I just want to say I plead out guilty, and that I'm sorry for the Bailey family and my family.
Okay. I'm sure that there'll be an opportunity, obviously, at sentencing hearings.
When it was Alexis's turn to climb the stands to say something, she brought a glass jar and then she calculatedly dropped 114 aqua stone hearts into it, signifying the amount of stabs her sister had to endure before she died. Should have been a whole lot of pain one wouldn't even want to imagine. Try to think if she was alive for all of the 114 stabs. That's the real torture there. The jar was there for all the family members. When they came on to say something, they would place a white stone into the jar, a testament that was filled with all manner of emotions, but then ended in sorrow and anger, knowing the little girl was gone. While Fucci hadn't said why he chose to kill her, since they were attending the same school and were friends also. Some of his friends said he had a weird fascination with knives, and he just wanted to kill someone.
Not many know what Forrest and I faced during our pregnancy with Tristan. We were moving to another country, Singapore, when I found out I was expecting another child.
You expect the mother of the deceased to be the most hurt of everyone, and yes, that was exactly the case. A mother losing her child is the worst thing any mother would ever imagine. She made a statement to the judge stating, "Do not think he can be saved by rehabilitation. This is beyond saving," she said to the judge. But when you think about it, what would be going through the mind of a 13-year-old who got stabbed by a trusted friend 100 times and more without stopping? The thought of the scene traumatized Stacy, and she told Fucci, "You have brought pain on me, my family, her friends, and our entire community," since they were basically neighbors.
For me, I have always loved being a mother and vowed endlessly to love, teach, and protect my children. I spent so many weeks traveling with Tristan for cheer over the years.
When the father had the chance to speak, he wasted no time in immediately facing Fucci and letting him know that his insincere apology was not accepted at all. It was basically all emotions for him, as he stated all the horrors and pain he had been going through since his daughter's passing, the amount of money spent on therapy, and losing a sense of himself, specifically stating an event the entire family had every Sunday, Bailey Family Fun Day. But we both can agree that it wouldn't be the same again, knowing that the event could never be the same again. To cut the long story short, a really emotional moment from all members of the entire family, including older brother Tegan and Brittany, where Tegan saw his sister the day he came home to celebrate Mother's Day. They watched TV together before he went in, only to go wake her up on Mother's Day and find her room empty. He really couldn't forgive Fucci, and Brittany was on her honeymoon when she got the call about her sister, who was missing, and later on confirmed dead.
I, however, failed in one lesson. I did not know that I needed to teach Tristan to be afraid of the evil in her own school.
A really sad day for a really large family, as Fucci succeeded in breaking an entire family. A really large one at that. It's really hard to think that any one of them would even consider forgiving the culprit. After his sentence, though, it was pretty hard to see if the kiddo felt bad for what he had done, or if it was just an obvious case of, "I am proud of what I just did, and I'd do it again in a heartbeat," as the brother just stood there unmoved and unfazed.
God! 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 God!
Damon Kemp. The case of Damon Kemp, a teenager accused of murdering his friends in Daytona Beach, Florida in 2018, is both shocking and deeply puzzling. What makes this story particularly disturbing is the absence of the usual red flags that might hint at such a tragic outcome. Damon Kemp was known as a straight-A student, a devoted son, and a trusted friend. So, what could have driven him to commit such a horrifying act in December 2018? On December 7th, 2018, Damon approached police officers who were investigating a reported home invasion in Daytona Beach. Visibly distressed and gasping for air, he made a shocking admission: "I killed my friend." Stunned by his confession, officers immediately took him into custody. However, Damon offered no additional information, leaving investigators to unravel the grim sequence of events. 15 hours after Damon Kemp's shocking confession, the investigation led police to an apartment at 434 Jimmy Ann Drive. There they discovered a bullet hole in the door, a shell casing nearby, and the lifeless bodies of Trey Ingram and Jordan Patton inside. Both 19 years old, the victims had suffered multiple gunshot wounds. Trey Ingram, affectionately known as Ace, was a local amateur boxer and former high school football star. A student at Bethune-Cookman University, he was working on returning to school. Jordan Patton, Trey's childhood friend since elementary school, shared a close bond with him. Quincy, a friend Damon had met at Bethune-Cookman University, shed light on Damon's alarming behavior in the weeks leading up to the murders. He described Damon as increasingly paranoid and erratic, frequently expressing fears that people were out to harm him. Damon's actions became so unsettling that at one point he attempted to crawl into bed with Quincy out of sheer fear. On the night of December 7th, Quincy drove Damon to Trey's apartment. Around 1:50 a.m., another resident, Korea Maktar, opened his door to find Damon pointing a firearm at him. Korea managed to calm Damon down enough to shut the door and call the police. This led to the police arriving at the scene, where Damon made his shocking confession. He shouted and made incoherent statements, leading many to speculate whether he was mentally ill or under the influence of substances at the time of the crime. His screams and shouts were really weird, as they were giving drug addict and "I'm high on something," making one think he probably was on something prior to that time. As I have stated before, a few days after his arrest, Damon Kemp admitted during a jail phone call that he had been under the influence of substances at the time of the crime. He recalled only smoking weed, but suggested it might have been laced with something else. While Damon denied having any history of mental illness, he was placed in the psychiatric unit of the jail. Following his conviction, he wasn't a minor, so it made his sentence somewhat easier, as any harsh punishment could be given without any sort of consideration, even a death sentence. I believe one saving grace Damon had was the fact that he was suspected of being on drugs or any sort of extra substance that altered his actions. Damon was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The fact that he went to a police officer to actually confess his crimes and all of that, one might try to even say that he was probably high or something, but it's pretty hard to say when his handprints were found on the gun that actually killed his friends.
That indeed. I tell you, deputies haven't yet released the motive behind the shooting, but right now, as Kemp is sitting behind bars, two families are planning funerals. Just a very sad story, Eric.
During the sentencing, the judge highlighted the gravity of the crime and the devastating impact it had on the families of Trey Ingram and Jordan Patton. In his remarks, the judge emphasized the profound loss of two young lives and the enduring pain and suffering endured by their loved ones. Trey's older sister, Laken Goldwire, also spoke and said, Trey was an amazing kid and was loved by all. Furthermore, she went on to state that he was a really mean and wicked person, as he took the goodness of two individuals who loved him and wanted to help him, and murdered them in cold blood. She made a statement, and it was a pretty resounding one. She said, "You shot Trey in his heart, the same organ that was used to create a space for him to know you." That was deep though, very deep, as it seemed rather disturbing for you to hear something like that. Sounds like his soul would be haunted forever. The question of whether Damon Kemp was genuinely experiencing a mental health crisis or simply pretending remains a point of speculation. On one hand, his erratic and paranoid behavior, as reported by Quincy, along with his placement in the psychiatric unit, suggests he may have been struggling with an underlying issue.
In both cases, are you pleading guilty because you are guilty and for no other reason? Yes. Okay.
Isaac Gonzalez. Isaac Gonzalez, 17, was sentenced to 40 years for murder and 20 years for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, with both sentences to run concurrently under a plea agreement. The The decision was finalized last Thursday by 437th District Court Judge Joel Perez. Isaac Gonzalez's careless actions cost a life and inflicted severe injuries. This tragic incident highlights the danger when firearms end up in the hands of children, stated Bexar County Criminal District Attorney Joe Gonzalez. He extended condolences to the family of Novita Putri and expressed hope that the sentence would provide justice to both victims. Although Gonzalez was a minor at the time of the shooting, he was later certified to stand trial as an adult. His warrants were issued on October 20th, 2023.
Like a war zone, with more than 100 shots fired into a home.
The Bexar County Sheriff's Office identified Isaac Gonzalez as a suspect in a drive-by shooting that targeted the wrong house at approximately 12:45 a.m. on October 4th, 2022. Tragically, 25-year-old Novita Brazil was shot in the face while working on her computer in her bedroom and died almost instantly, according to Sheriff Javier Salazar. In addition to Novita's death, another woman, an Airbnb tenant who had just arrived the night before, suffered a gunshot wound to the leg. Around 100 rounds were fired at the home using several different weapons, further highlighting the reckless and deadly nature of the attack.
I'm gonna get another bond too. I'm gonna get another bond.
Deputies arrived at the scene to find one white four-door vehicle speeding away from the area. Authorities were able to stop the vehicle a short time later near Highway 151 and Acme Road and make arrests. Multiple teenagers have been charged in the case, including 15-year-old Rene Gonzalez, who was charged with murder. Gonzalez, who was on the run after his case, didn't stop, where, when he got caught, he taunted police officials on live TV. Bexar County Criminal District Attorney Joe Gonzalez said in his statement, "Our condolences to Novita Putri's family, and may the sentence deliver justice to both parties." Based on the fact that the murder wasn't planned or anything whatsoever, it couldn't really be tied to him as the murderer, but a street shooting gone wrong. Regardless of that, though, he was in possession of some firearms, and several shots were fired. Approximately 100 shots, or even more than that, and it ended the life of a youngster who was just starting her life and was pretty much thinking about how to move to the next stage of her life. He was sentenced to about 40 years in jail, plus another 20 years, which would be served consecutively over counts of murder and another charge of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon in hand.
Murked in court, but pleaded guilty.
While his trial was going on and all the sentences were being passed, Gonzalez also appeared to be smirking in court following his sentence, even after admitting to the crimes he committed. His neighbor, who caught the footage of the shooting, said in an interview that she believes he doesn't realize how much he had hurt a lot of people.
And based on the evidence of the two trials I presided over, there's no doubt that you caused all the death and carnage in this case.
Michael Sykes. Michael Sykes is another case that would continue to baffle many in several years to come. The definition of what a coward is. Michael Sykes was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder when he brutally stabbed 2 of his girlfriend's children to death. Among the 2 kids he stabbed, one of them was his. Ziana Cutler, who was just 1 year old, was not his direct kid but his girlfriend's, with her previous boyfriend perhaps, and then Malia Sykes, a 4-month-old child who was his own, but still did not escape certain death from her father. While we think the only thing he was guilty of was killing Malaya and Ziana, that was not just it. He also attempted to kill a 3rd child, Miracle Cutler, as he also stabbed her mercilessly. But then she showed strength and utter resilience by not dying and staying alive despite her father's strong will to put an end to her life. And that was not just all. He also attempted to end the life of his girlfriend too by stabbing her, but thankfully she survived and was able to drag him to justice in November of 2017. While the murder of Malia and Ziana, then the attempted murder on the 3rd child, Miracle, that survived, all happened on the 10th of February 2016 inside the Ramada Inn that was located at Staten Island. When you thought the case would easily be concluded with Michael Sykes being the abrupt killer and possibly immediately sentenced to any sort of harsh punishment, as he allegedly killed 2 daughters and also killed their mother. Here's the twist. He said he didn't kill his daughters. Michael was a very loving dad to his kids, both the one he had directly with Rebecca and the ones that Rebecca had before they were together. He said Rebecca murdered the 2 girls, and then when he came and saw that, he stabbed Rebecca to death. His mother also confirmed that after the incident happened, he called her with a shaky voice, telling her that he had killed his girlfriend and he wanted to kill himself now. It became really confusing at a point and somehow felt like the defense was trying to manufacture lies to save the skin of the persecuted. What's more, it really made sense seeing that he was not a man of violence and doesn't have any violent record. Gallucci, who was the defense lawyer and the defendant for Michael Sykes, gave his all for this case and even managed to put the court in a difficult situation when he stated that Michael was innocent, repeating that Rebecca killed the little girls and not the father. And come to think about it, I really can't believe that's what happened. And this is just a case of Michael being unlucky and, once again, another case of solid injustice added to the pile of injustice already in the judiciary and legislative system.
Justice should be tempered with mercy. This is not one of those cases.
There was no leniency as to the verdict of all the crimes committed. Even with the claim of Michael Sykes and his defendant Gallucci, the court still had valid evidence that he killed all the affected in that scenario. It's easier to tie a murder to someone who is still alive than one who is already dead, so the claim of Rebecca killing her kids seemed invalid, whereas Michael was possibly jealous that Rebecca was leaving him and going back to her old boyfriend, meaning that he wouldn't get to keep his kids. In frustration and guilt, he left the house of the friend he was staying with, took one of her knives, and headed to carry out the mission in mind. The street footage captured showed his hastiness and panic state as he knew what he had done. His sentence. He was sentenced to prison for life without the option of parole on counts of first-degree murder for Ziana Cutler and another life sentence on the same count for Malia Sykes. He also received a second-degree charge of attempted murder for Miracle, who survived. He got 25 years for that and another 25 years for the murder of Rebecca. All these were expected to run consecutively, as stated by the judge. He also made a statement that would have let Michael know his fate was sealed. The judge said they'd ask us to tamper mercy with justice, but that won't be done here. Was he guilty or innocent? That we don't know, but all we know for sure was that he was involved in murder, and realistically, he'd be pretty inhuman if he really tried to end the lives of his babies.
Count 1, murder. We, the jury, recommend and fix the penalty as death.
Tiffany Moss. Imani Moss, the stepdaughter of Tiffany Moss, died on a Monday morning while she was being starved intentionally by her stepmother, who made sure the 10-year-old child died of starvation and thereafter proceeded to burn the body and bury it to conceal all evidence. The Gwinnett County mother was tried the next day, and the jury decided that she be put to death.
A Gwinnett County stepmother stared straight ahead, briefly looked down for just a moment before she raised her head again, and then
she was convicted of exactly 6 charges in respect to this case: murder, felony murder, cruelty to children, first degree, and concealing the death of another, with counts of felony murder and first degree appearing more than once. The district attorney for Gwinnett County stated that the punishment for this crime had to fit the offense, and in this case, the offense was utterly vile and completely inhuman. Starvation is a form of torture, even more so for a 10-year-old girl. The sentence was fitting and proper for cruelty of such magnitude. The father of Imani, Eman, came up to testify for his wife, and it was really evident that he was trying to cover up for her in order to avoid the death penalty.
Iman allegedly calculated every part of Imani's abuse and death,
while jumping from one story to another, to a new one again, confusing the entire courtroom. But this was a room filled with really intelligent individuals who would not be fooled by the made-up lies. It was a really sad scene also to see the burnt body of little Imani, completely and totally heartbreaking.
Going forward from this point.
In terms of representation, or is there something you need from the court that you don't have?
While Judge George Hutchinson gave Tiffany an opportunity to speak to the court during her death trial, she seemed rather unfazed and had absolutely nothing major to say. As a matter of fact, she was even laughing while she was trying to speak to the judge, showing no sense of remorse or any kind of regret for what she did to her stepdaughter.
Offensive murder as alleged in count 1 was outrageously or wantonly vile, horrible, or inhuman in that it involved torture of the victim before death.
George Hutchinson requested the verdict of the jurors on the penalty that Tiffany Moss would face. Of course, it had to be a unanimous decision by all the jurors, and they all decided that she be sentenced to death, which the prosecutor did not flinch at all.
We're returning to 18B 1541-1, State of Georgia versus Tiffany Nicole Moss. The defendant's present along with standby counsel. State's counsel's present as well.
The judge took another 3 minutes to interrogate every single juror whose decision made it to his table, asking if their decision was theirs and if it still remained the same. The jurors all agreed and answered yes, completing and ending a case that seemed like it would take more time than expected. If you enjoyed these cases, then make sure to watch our next ones shown on screen.